Welcome to another special edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the tragic loss of Air India 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt, Germany. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
This episode, viewers, is called Cognitive Disorder. On the 28th of June 2024, a serious incident occurred at London Gatwick Airport with a British Airways Boeing 777 flight departing for Vancouver, Canada, with 334 passengers and 13 crew. The plane aborted takeoff on the Gatwick runway after its co-pilot muddled up his left and right hands, investigators have found. The UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, the AAIB, said the error resulted in the aircraft's brakes catching fire. British Airways had issued a safety notice about focusing during pre-flight briefings and regular simulator training before the incident, highlighting the importance of cognitive consideration during critical actions. The co-pilot on the flight unintentionally pulled his hand back on the thrust lever, reducing power output when he should have taken his hand away during the takeoff, the investigation found. Richard, can you give us some more details about what happened?
Yes, we're showing a screenshot of the British Airways incident. During takeoff, the co-pilot began retarding the thrust levers at airspeed V1 instead of removing his hand from the thrust levers. And so with right hand, he would have been prepared to pull back to rotate. And instead, with his left hand, he started pulling back on the thrust levers. After momentarily advancing them again, he initiated a rejected takeoff procedure, the RTO procedure, around two knots of IAS speed later. The RTO was performed effectively, and the aircraft stopped some distance before the end of the runway surface. The report considers the complex nature of the takeoff role and why mental rehearsal of motor actions may benefit pilots, particularly if they've recently had a time off from flying. It discusses the industry-wide challenge of preventing such action slips. The operator, British Airways, has already published a methodical approach to control selections, which it has promoted in pre-flight briefing material. It has included a wider issue in the focus on its recurrent simulator training.
So today we're going to look at cognitive disorders, particularly relating to Air India 171. We'll be answering viewers' questions from yesterday's episode on cause and effect as well, and as I said, including the cognitive disorder, timing and smoke. Tomorrow we'll be looking at system disorders. Richard, can you give us a bit of a sneak preview of that one?
Yeah, so tomorrow, system disorder, we're going to look at things, for example, like the fuel shutoff valves, where there's a safety notice which has recently come out, and a mandatory actions airworthiness directive on the Boeing 787. And it basically is saying daily checks to be performed on the fuel shutoff valves. Another one we're looking at is the FADEC MN4 processor malfunctions. A MN4 processor fault could cause dual engine shutdown without any manual switch action. And the Indian DGCA and the South Korean and Japanese regulators have ordered immediate inspections of the fuel switch locks based on the 2018 FAA advisory. We know Air India has commenced those checks on all its Boeing 787s and has not found any faults yet, with full inspections expected soon.
So we're going to look at viewer comments and questions surrounding cognitive disorders. Mark, Romeo Whiskey 3 Kilo Whiskey. The odds that the captain had a stroke or some other brain event that caused him to think he should move the switches to cut off are greater than the chances that both engines failed before the switches were set to cut off without the enhanced airborne flight recorder reporting any such problems in the event log. Replying to that, CLKAMG, you are being overly generous to the captain. Beyond making a list of everything that might have happened, there are no reasons that I have seen to think that one thing or another accounts for what the captain might have done. Absolutely none. Richard.
Yeah, good points from both viewers. I looked up the medical data on possible stroke risk. There's a Framingham Heart Study, CDC data, and data from the World Health Organization. The average annual risk of stroke for someone aged 55 to 60 is between 0.3% and 0.5%. So 3 in 1,000 to 5 in 1,000. They talk about the known risk reducers: normal blood pressure, no smoking, regular exercise, healthy diet, normal cholesterol and blood sugar, no atrial fibrillation, no family history of stroke. And the report states that the medical checks for both pilots were up to date. And can only underline that we expect in the final report a fuller medical and psychological report and evaluation. So at this stage, we do not know very much more than the medical checks were in order.
Richard, Paul Todd 3497 says the co-pilot said he did not do it. Can we trust that call?
Yeah, well, the report actually does not name which pilot asked the question and which pilot answered the question. So people are jumping to conclusions. It could have been the captain or the first officer asking the question and the other then replying. That's why I would like to have the full cockpit transcript or audio before making a judgment on whether we can trust the call.
Boris Medved 835 says, I'm surprised that we aren't seeing detailed stories about the pilot's mental or psychological state.
Well, there are actually quite a lot of stories, both in the mainstream media and in the social media. And, I think we can't really trust the mainstream or the social media stories until we have seen the full medical and psychological reports and evaluations, which should hopefully be in the final report on this tragic accident.
Yes, just to add there's loads of stories in the Indian media about the, but covering that particular area. Richard, viewers have raised several other issues yesterday. Timing is the next topic. Lars Berglund, 4608. According to the preliminary report, fuel cutoff switches was moved to cutoff at 080842 and back to run 080852. That's 10 seconds. Not a typical recycling timing for me. More of a correction made by the other pilot. Very good point.
Yeah, very good point. The preliminary report states the aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots IAS at about 080842 UTC. And I will point out the word about, and the data we have is only to the nearest second, so we're not going down to milliseconds. And then it carries on. The report says immediately thereafter. Well, how immediately? Don't know. The engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff position, one after the another, with a time gap of 0.1 second. So the transition from run to cutoff started at just after 080842 and lasted, if you take 0.1 to mean 1 second, until 080843 UTC to the nearest second. Some viewers have pointed out that 0.1 might be a typo, and what they really meant was 0.1. I even saw one viewer saying 0.01. So the typo is the decimal point is missing in front of the 0.1. I've pointed out that the report only gives time to the nearest second. I've also pointed out the report states 02 flight crew, and they certainly don't mean 0.2 crew. So I think it's just a formatting issue, and I think we can safely ignore leading zeros in the formatting in the report.
Sean Alcorn, okay, as devil's advocate, if we are seeing one or both engines failing on rotation, then how do we get to 180 knots from 155 knots in just 3 seconds later? That's a good question too.
It's a great question. So the report states at 080835, V rotation, IAS 155 knots. 4 seconds later, at 39 seconds past 0808, air mode transition. And then another 3 seconds later after that, at 42, maximum airspeed 180 knots. So the way I read it, it's the speed increased 25 knots in 7 seconds, not 3. And it was 4 seconds still on the runway until the air mode transition, followed by 3 seconds after the transition to air mode. And the rate of increase of the indicated airspeed was 3.57 knots per second. The post VR speed typically is a figure around this magnitude, say between 2 and 4 knots per second, but it's dependent on a large number of factors: weight, thrust, climb gradient, wind speed, wind direction, pitch altitude after rotation, residual thrust if there's an engine failure, ground effect, the slight downhill slope, a delayed pitch response, and I could go on. So from the video analysis, we conclude the engine failures were at 080840, right engine failure. And we're showing a screenshot of this timing, the timing from the report and from the CCTV put together. And the left engine failure was at 080844. So both engine failures were after the transition to air mode. The right engine 1 second after, and the left engine 5 seconds after. So for the 7 seconds between VR and Vmax being achieved, the right engine was still working for 5 seconds of that 7, and the left engine was working for the full 7 seconds. We're showing another screenshot of the engine events and a table of the timing of different engine events. And the timing, from the timing of engine relight events from the switch events. The right engine first relight was not successful, but the second relight was successful, but only after 16 seconds elapsed from the failure. And the left engine first relight was immediately successful after 6 seconds. So you have to go through the timing very carefully, and I will include in the description below both of these tables that we've just been showing.
So, Michael Nordvisk, 4475, how do you explain the 10-second delay before the switches were put back in the run position? If the pilots tried to restart the engines, it would have been done faster. And one pilot asked the other, why did you cut off?
Very good point, Michael. In the space of 17 seconds, there were 9 events recorded. Air mode transition, right engine failure, maximum airspeed 180 knots achieved, both engine fuel switches from run to cutoff, left engine failure, rat deployed, engine 1, which is left, fuel switch cutoff back to run, APU inlet door opened, engine 2, the right engine, fuel switch cutoff to run. During this time, both FADECs on both engines and the pilots, both pilots were managing an emergency situation. So you had 4 inputs, 2 FADEC system inputs and 2 pilot inputs going on. And in the midst of that, there would have been a tsunami of ICAS messages. The cognitive process of who or what was doing some action, and there were a myriad of actions in that 17 seconds, it can easily be misinterpreted or distorted. And I do not believe we can come to any conclusion on the situational awareness without the full CVR transcript or audio data release, without the FDR data, and without the ATC transcript. And we need to have all of that and put it together and really understand moment by moment what was happening before we can answer your question, how do you explain the 10-second delay?
Blue Sound Cave, excellent work again. What I can't understand is why did it take 9 to 13 seconds to put the switches back to run position? What's your hypothesis on this topic? And QCK 57594, you say the pilots recycle the switches. Why did it take 10 to 12 seconds to cycle the switches? Do you think the NTSB would allow them to falsify the switch positions and times?
Yeah, well, as I say, I've included the 2 tables on the takeoff timing and the engine event timing in the description, and you can take a look at that and come to your own conclusions out of your own analysis. We previously included the ADSB data in both a table format and a Google Earth plot of the various points. We've also included the CCTV data for the left and right engine in both movie format and PDF format in all of the recent episode descriptions. So you asked what my hypothesis is. My hypothesis is a dual engine failure immediately after takeoff, not simultaneous, but almost simultaneously, with too little residual thrust to achieve a true airspeed of any more than 180 knots, or to achieve an altitude above ground level of much more than just 300 feet. And most importantly, too little time to successfully complete a dual engine relight sequence. And basically, the bottom line is they ran out of time.
Carl Uzo, may I ask about the smoke or dust that can be seen when the plane took off? Does it have any relevance in the sequence of events that led to the crash?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it absolutely is relevant because it's a possible indication of a single or a dual engine failure.
Overland Journo, Richard says, thanks for the great video. A simple simulation of the time it took between 080843 fuel cutoff switch 2 and 080852 fuel cutoff switch 1 is eye-boggling. Just try it and stop everything you're doing now for 10 seconds. Baffling.
Yeah, good point, Overland Journo. It may be baffling. It may be baffling simply for no other reason than we are talking about a 1 in a billion flying hours occurrence. The possibility of a single engine failure on takeoff is relatively small, but it has happened. The possibility of a dual engine failure on takeoff is right up there in the 1 in a billion probability or less. So, yeah, I can understand it's baffling.
Anthony Dolio, 8118. Richard, your scenario sounds believable. What seems unbelievable is that the preliminary report would fail to mention the single failure or any other catastrophic or major change in operations prior to the switch being moved. It seems to me that the omission of such a salient point would amount to a fraud, and it seems foolish because I find it hard to believe that the information will not eventually get out unless everyone in the change of custody of that information across nations is part of the fraud that should be in charge of the custody.
Yeah, or the chain of custody.
Yeah.
There's quite clearly a typo going on there. But, to be frank, Anthony, I have serious doubts about the preliminary report, and I know Geoffrey does too. And we're not alone. Many experts have raised serious doubts, and many viewers have questioned the report. We made our views plain in the previous 33 episodes. You go back through and you can watch them all. We've been clear from the start. We have many questions and many concerns. We stated yesterday, and I quote, the preliminary report was designed to confuse everybody, and it appears the ploy has worked.
A follow-on question from Anthony is, could the delay in turning the fuel switch back on have been caused by a scuffle between the two pilots? The one who turned them off may have tried to prevent the other from turning them back on. Interesting
Yeah,
point.
Anthony, good point. And everything is possible, including a fight in the cockpit. And it has happened before.
Yeah, sure has. Don Stewart, 323. Congrats to you guys on another sterling report, very even-handed. It is clear that the NTSB is the only organisation that is in a position to refute the AAIB of India's reporting on the FDR and CVR data, since it is the only other organisation that had access to that data. Well, the AAIB of England does too. It is clear that the NTSB threatened to pull out of the investigation consortium because it didn't want to be associated with the AAIB report in its initial state. Fortunately, the AAIB realised the value of having the NTSB legitimacy, so the already biased report was modified to placate the NTSB, which has a history of not interfering in other countries' internal investigations unless invited, but also has a history of recussing itself from investigations that smell like a rat. While the NTSB will not force any international investigative body to include info in their report, that which is published will be scrutinised by the NTSB for accuracy. So, with the NTSB back on the investigation team, we should feel pretty confident that whatever actual FDR data in the AAIB report is probably accurate. But there are so many holes in the report timeline. The capacity of the GE3254F EAFR is 2 hours of voice and 24 hours of 88 aircraft data points prior to the crash in real time and is driven by internal battery. We haven't seen but a tiny fraction of the data and no voice. How do these people sleep at night?
Very good question and very interesting set of points. Yeah, we've had very little concrete data from the CVR or the FDR or from the ATC transcript or the ADSB data or the ACARS data or any other source officially. And you ask, how do these people sleep at night? Well, I think the reason these people sleep at night is because they have their agenda and they are achieving their goals. And if you're happy with achieving your goals, whatever your agenda is, then you can sleep at night.
Just adding there, Richard, for Don, the NTSB actually does have a record of voicing its concerns. It did with Silk Air, the Silk Air disaster, and it also did with the Ethiopian MAX crash, as did the BEA of France with the MAX crash as well, because the Ethiopian report was flawed.
Could I just add another comment to that comment? So I do hope NTSB or the UK AAIB, if they feel we're being misled, does make a statement. And, you know, they have done before. The precedence is set. We also know there was an ICAO observer. So if ICAO think we're being misled, or incomplete data or inaccurate data, then I think ICAO should also say a word.
Yep. So following on from that comment, JDS509, the widespread scepticism regarding the preliminary report amongst knowledgeable individuals begs the question if the UK AAIB and the NTSB will come out with a rebuttal addendum clarification to the preliminary report. I don't know what legal restrictions they face in this regard, but morally it seems they are compelled to do so and should, if at all, be possible. Thank you for your continued in-depth reporting.
Yeah, well, Jay, I completely agree with you. And following the AAIB India publication of their report, the ball is now firmly in the court of the NTSB and the AAIB in the UK. So, it's up to them to decide how they wish to respond. And if the report is inaccurate in anything as stated, you'd hope that that would be pointed out. And if it's incomplete or misleading, you would hope that the complete data to be able to come to a balanced conclusion, preliminary findings and preliminary conclusion would be made.
Purple Peter Eaters, J8J, I'm 100% in agreement with Richard's final thoughts on what happened. Excellent summary, and I think Richard is the best at this kind of stuff, and I'm old. Great work by you both.
Oh, thank you for that comment. And I'm old too.
So the final word goes to Tumbleweed Weed 3691. As a member of the flying public, I find the report tantalisingly vague and incomplete. I need more information and I am waiting.
Yeah, well, tumbleweed, weed, so are we waiting.
Yeah, we sure are. So, Richard, thank you for your work on this today. It's been a fascinating exercise, as always. Viewers, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please keep those wonderful comments coming. We do so appreciate them. And keep of course, those wonderful questions coming. They're fantastic. But please bear in mind that there are over 1,000 comments for each episode now. Plus, we get probably 100 emails each, something like that, from you. And we've put our email addresses in. And please do email us. But we may not be
Yeah.
able to respond to you personally. But we sincerely appreciate the input. Some of these emails are absolutely fascinating, as are the comments. So, Richard, thank you again.
You're very welcome. And I would just add over 100 emails from viewers on top of a whole bunch of emails from mainstream media and also from authoritative individuals, captains, pilots, aviation engineers, people from Boeing, people from, working on the 787. And that's all flooding in on top of over 1,000 comments per day. So you can imagine we are in information overload.
Yeah, we are indeed. But that's great. Loving it. And, if we can advance the investigation or put pressure on the investigators to give us more details. And of course, one of the things we must remember here is there's a lot of families and a lot of friends who are still in a state of shock and will be for years to come over this disaster. And they, in my view, deserve a lot better than what they've got so far. And I think that's the real tragedy of this, not only the loss of life, but the pain those relatives and friends must be feeling and the anguish over this terrible tragedy. Do you not agree, Richard?
Yeah, it's very sad, very tragic.
So viewers, please tune in tomorrow for system disorders. Thank you.